Hey everyone, today we're going to be ranking all 25 of the current killers from least to most scary. For this ranking we're going to be considering just their design, and not look into the lore too much, just to keep things simple. I kinda want to rank them from the perspective of the survivors, if that makes sense. The survivors don't know much about the killers and their stories, so it kinda makes sense that the basis of how scary they'd appear would be mainly based off of visuals. So yeah, this is like an immersed survivor perspective, least to most scary list. For this we have 4 tiers: quite scary, very scary, incredibly scary, and finally, outright terrifying. As always, be sure to drop your own thoughts on this down below. These are just my own thoughts, and what is and isn't scary is always going to be a pretty subjective thing. Let's get into it. Okay, so starting off with the quite scary tier. The Trickster I'm putting in our lowest spot. Trickster is a character I get the feeling was never made with the intention of being scary, at least directly. I feel Trickster was always meant to look more stylish and colourful, and as a result I simply don't think he's as scary as many of the other killer characters. He does have scary parts however, like his creepy and disturbing smile, and the cruel neon bat that he wields that shows off his sadistic nature, and how much he enjoys his role as a killer. His laughs and general chilled out nature is definitely unnerving too. Next up we're going with the Legion. Legion definitely have a fear factor, looking completely unhinged and carrying a bloody knife, and wearing masks with blood smiles on them. Aside this, they are on the smaller side for killers and are physically far more human looking than many of the others. Again, still a scare factor, but definitely one of the least scary and imposing in comparison to the other killers. I think they just about top Trickster due to their more brutal appearance. The Ghostface is up next, and visually isn't the scariest to be fair. Again, he's physically a much more regular size human. He wears a pretty creepy but not all too scary mask. I would argue his tactical leather attire makes him seem a bit scarier, especially when you consider he's probably custom made this outfit specifically for his stalking and killing. I think his clear enjoyment of what he's doing though, seen through animations and the little laughs he does, adds this creepy feel despite the blank mask. So his seeming experience or preparedness I think puts him above the rest here. The Pig is up next and is also less physically imposing and closer to the regular size of a human. The most disturbing part about Pig is her mask, which based on the cosmetics description is actually a severed pig head. I also think the contraptions like the hidden blade and the reverse bear trap definitely add an extra scare element to her. I remember when I first started out with the game, one of the characters I found the most scary was Pig, just because at first I believed it was literally a person who'd had a pig head attached onto their body. Regardless though, it's still gross and creepy, even with the knowledge of it just being a mask. It seems like something from the survivor's perspective they could easily misinterpret. The Clown gets most of his fear from his gross visuals. He has a poorly fitted clown suit on and holds a grubby and bloody butterfly knife. His face paint is chipping off and he has a creepy and disturbing smile. A bit like some of these other lower characters, I think the fact that he's at least more human looking definitely puts him down on the lower end. If you were to bump into him, it'd still be terrifying, but not to the extent of say turning the corner and seeing the overwhelming distorted mass of Nemesis or something. Clown is pretty grounded still, but grotesque and scary to look at. One of his scariest features is probably the ring of fingers that he carries around on his waist. That's pretty scary to be fair. The Plague is coming up next. I think the Plague is a hard one to judge when it comes to her fear factor. I think the fact she is from a completely different time to many of the survivors though would be quite unnerving, because it suggests that there would be even less of a likelihood to reason with them as their lives have been lived thousands of years apart. Also of course there's the visuals, like half of her body and face rotting, which is kinda scary to look at. It's further worth mentioning that she's quite a tall and imposing character, with her upright posture and elaborate clothing. Initially she doesn't seem so scary, but if you were to encounter her in real life, you would probably think differently. The twins get most of their horror from the fact that they have Victor just sitting in the huge opened wound of Charlotte, and he occasionally just jumps out and starts shrieking at you and leaping about everywhere. Charlotte is a fairly regular sized human, but she looks pretty strong and wields a grisly and cruel sickle as her weapon. And again, Victor would be pretty terrifying to see. This superhuman speed character who can leap about and claw away at you, distorting your senses. I think further the fact that Victor can be kicked and then regrown is definitely a scary element of this character. Imagine running into these two, managing to fight off Victor, only for him to come back 6 seconds later. Next up we have the very scary tier. The Deathslinger is a character who creates most of his fear through the way he presents himself. He looks confident in his skill set and seems capable and experienced. Paired with this, he has a horrifying and cruel weapon that can pierce into you and drag you toward him. Again, physically not the most imposing really, but the atmosphere he creates evens this out. He has a certain authority to him as he hunts survivors down, and I think that would make him pretty terrifying to face in a trial from the survivor's point of view. Essentially being hunted by a seemingly incredibly experienced bounty hunter with an incredibly grisly looking gun. The Wraith definitely has a fear factor to him. I feel he's a great character for showing his tragedy through visuals alone. First off, he's physically quite human in appearance, with only a few supernatural elements like his cloaking. He has a cold and expressionless face with piercing eyes, and he wields a pretty scary looking weapon crafted from a spine and a skull. The ringing of the bell is certainly another element to his design, which adds a lot of atmosphere, and generally an extra layer of creepiness. Overall, he's this ghost basically, who could appear out of anywhere, which is pretty scary. The Huntress mainly gets her fear factor from her tall and imposing stature, and the fact she wields multiple axes. Her clothing choice isn't exactly scary really, it's more practical if anything. Her hair mask is quite unnerving and creepy, but I wouldn't classify it as outright scary, although maybe so with her constant humming of a lullaby. One of the creepiest things when I started out with the game was that distant singing of the lullaby. It felt as a survivor you were constantly under threat and an axe could suddenly whiz over to your position. Again, it's the atmosphere she creates. Hearing that lullaby was being hunted by her would be pretty terrifying. The Hillbilly is next up, and a character who largely creates fear by being this big imposing guy with two grisly and scary weapons. In one hand is this brutal cattle hammer, and in the other a customized chainsaw. That alone is gonna make you go, no thanks, I'll walk the long way today. Aside this, much of his body is contorted and covered in these quite unsettling visuals, like the staples holding his skin together, or the large amount of boils or pustules growing on his arm. His groans and growls certainly add to his fear factor too, as well as his incredible and supernatural speed. The Cannibal I'm putting above many of these supernatural and scary characters, as I think the visual of him wearing a mask of human skin is straight up terrifying. It's a human skin mask, and on a big imposing guy with a brutal cattle hammer and a chainsaw, a lot like Hillbilly. I find the fact that Bubba is far more grounded in reality makes him all the more scary. It's a fairly regular sized person, but he's got two scary weapons and he's wearing human skin. In a sense, I think that's far scarier than many of the more otherworldly characters. The Nightmare is up next, and a character who I think purely on visuals alone is carried by the fact that he's supernatural and essentially has that to back up his scary appearance. If Freddy was just a guy with a clawed glove and a stripy sweater, he might be the lowest, but the fact he clearly has some supernatural ability makes him scarier. His weapon is probably one of the better parts about Freddy's visuals, having a custom clawed glove which looks pretty painful to be hit by. Aside this though, he wears fairly normal clothes, and it's his creepy smile and full body burns that make him unsettling. From the survivor's perspective, this guy can also manipulate your dreams and also put you to sleep. That's a pretty scary combo. The Nurse is incredibly creepy I feel. The cloth covering her head, her stifled breathing, her crumpled and broken posture, but clear telekinetic strength is all really well done, and makes her pretty scary I think. The way she can essentially teleport with her blinks and screams out as she does is kinda terrifying. She's probably one of the scariest characters who is less physically imposing. She doesn't need to be this big strong mass. She's just creepy for all these specific features, which I think is pretty cool. The Cenobite I feel gains lots of his scare factor from just looking so unfazed by everything in the trials. He just walks around with a completely straight face, firing chains at people. His visuals like his flayed or removed flesh, and the pins all puncturing his head are pretty creepy too. I think his demeanor though is a large part of why he's pretty scary though. The supernatural element is also a big factor too. From the survivor's perspective, I imagine the teleportation and the chains firing from portals would be pretty scary. Moving on to the incredibly scary tier. The Hag is a great case of a character who is scary without being physically big or having big scary weapons. She's the smallest killer when she's hunched over, and doesn't even directly have a weapon she wields, just her long claw. Despite this, she's very scary to look at, with her sharpened teeth, her distorted and clawed arms, and then her body which is whittled down to the bone, making her look incredibly skeletal. She looks very animalistic, with very little humanity remaining. Alongside this, she has supernatural elements with her hexes, and her ability to teleport to your position when you trigger a trap is pretty terrifying. The Blight is a great character who I think is designed really well. Blight has some of the best animations, I feel, where he jitters about, darting his head side to side, and generally being quite hyperactive as he craves orange plant. I've mentioned it a bunch before, but I love the clash of the before and after of Blight, with his sophistication seeping through to his current blighted and destroyed state. It's the shift from human to inhuman. A bit like Wraith, I feel you can somewhat understand the tragedy behind the character, which I think is quite important. The way he rushes about and screeches is also pretty scary too, and his general zombie-like appearance. The shape is scary for a similar reason to Cenobite, in that he's just very unfazed or seemingly uncaring about going around and killing people. He's not excited, he's not angry, he's just neutral, which is pretty scary. I find Shape's whole vibe does this better than Cenobite though, in a more simple and effective way. Shape is a pretty tall and strong guy, with a creepy and expressionless mask, and a simple kitchen knife. I think the way he stalks definitely adds to his horror elements too, over some other characters who just get right into chases. His role of the far-off Shape in the distance is done very well, and you can picture him as purely and simply evil. There's also the factor of his clear power through his ability to mori survivors sooner than any other killer. Next, let's talk about the OG, the Trapper. Trapper is pretty scary and has a great design. Despite his physically human appearance, he seems inhuman due to the spikes and hooks piercing his skin, and the face hidden behind the grinning bear skull mask, and his wielding of a self-made machete-type weapon. Trapper also moves in a very determined way and looks to be quite unstoppable, and almost like this powerful force that you can't overcome. There's also this anticipation element of him, with his traps acting as this point of nervousness as you flee from him. The Demogorgon is a fairly straightforward case for being scary, as it's literally just a creature built for death and destruction. It's huge, indestructible, and has brutal weapons built right into its biology. It has huge and cruel claws, and then a head filled with hundreds of teeth. Then the animalistic aspect of Demo is also pretty terrifying. Again, like a few others mentioned, there's no way to reason with it. Your best option is to just run. Also, it's a supernatural creature, who as a survivor you can assume is from another dimension or even an alien of some kind, which is pretty scary in itself. Finally, we have the outright terrifying tier. This spirit is a really interesting one for how scary she appears in game. From the survivor perspective, with no context on her background, she's probably one of the more terrifying characters to face. She's an angry, teleporting, supernatural spirit set on vengeance. She's not the most physically imposing character, but the visuals of her sliced limbs and the glass that punctures her skin is enough to even this out for sure. Her face is probably one of her creepiest features, contorting from a smile into a frown every few seconds, in her janky and disturbing fashion. She can also totally summon a katana from the shard in her hand, which, you know, isn't exactly normal, and to be honest, scary. The Oni is a character who is initially scary just purely through his stature and clearly brutal nature. He's a massive guy with huge hulking armor, a kanabo sitting on his back, and a katana in his hands. The other element that makes Oni scary is the fact that he's clearly pretty good at killing stuff and has a good deal of strategic knowledge. A bit like the Deathslinger, I feel like you can look at the Oni and you can see that he's got experience. Of course, the other scary factor is the supernatural element to him, where he can scream and burst into flames, and sprint at you full speed as a result. This guy is straight up terrifying. The Nemesis is a really well designed character, I find. I've heard a lot of people don't like his redesign over his original RE3 look, but I think he looks pretty scary like this. He's this huge mass of meat contained in this black rubbery material. His face looks pulled into a constant bared expression of anticipation and pain, and generally he just looks pretty terrifying. Much like Oni, Nemesis looks outright unstoppable, but also calculating at the same time. I find this look to be a bit scary than Oni, as he just looks more inhuman, and even less likely to hear out any form of reason. The Doctor may be a little controversial to put this high, but I think this guy looks so sadistic and twisted, and just far too eager to kill stuff, it's hard to not say he looks terrifying. Despite being more physically human, his expression is inhuman as he grins and laughs. His face is drawn into a wide smile with his headgear, and he has electricity surging into his brain and body. He twitches about constantly and appears incredibly twisted. I really think Doctor is a big contender to many of these supernatural characters and creatures. He's so grounded and horrifying. The Executioner is still the scariest character in my opinion. I find the combination of human and inhuman to be really unnerving and scary. Pyramid Head brings along an unmatched atmosphere as he drags his great knife. Then his crippled posture, a result of the heavy pyramid he has for a head, is creepy and is this perfect harsh structure to clash with his more rounded and human body. His clear power and supernatural elements also make him very scary. I don't think it's quite any one thing, but I find Pyramid Head's overall design to be a near perfect one for horror and as a scary character. It feels like he combines lots of the elements I've mentioned for all of these characters and just absorbs them all up. He takes a good part from each of them. Alright, well that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and be sure to drop your own thoughts on this down below. Thanks, and goodbye.